Hello and welcome to Changing World. My name is Anthony Smith, and joining me today is a Mr. Arie Brish. Now, Arie is the CEO of a company by the name of CXO360. CXO360 is a leadership advisory firm which specialises in providing growth strategies, business development, change leadership and turnaround for other businesses, both large and small. He is also the author of a best-selling book entitled Lay an Egg and Make Chicken Soup, which is described as a practical guide for the many moving parts and potential blind spots in commercializing new products and services. So, Arie, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me, Anthony. I really appreciate it.
No, it's a pleasure. I'd like to start out, Arie, by asking you what exactly inspired you to write the book, and who exactly is it aimed for?
Okay, good question. The story of this book is actually funny because I started to write, I have been mentor for many entrepreneurs in the past several years and have been myself involved personally in different new products and technology innovations. So I have been involved with hundreds of new products over the years. And at some point, I saw some common thread with most of the entrepreneurs having, a brilliant idea of something, but in most cases, they do not have enough experience to anticipate any blind spots, or in military jargon, we call it landmines that are waiting for you along the way.
Right, yeah.
So I started to chat some notes. After every, mentorship session I had, I started to write notes for myself. At some point, I realized that there is enough material and enough justification to have such a book, because most of the books about ventures and entrepreneurships, they focus on two areas. They focus on the ideation side. Ideation is how to come with a good idea. Okay. And they focus on how to raise money for your new venture if you need external funding for it. But then they stop there. Most of the books stop right there, and they don't. There is very few books. Maybe mine is one of the very few that talks about the execution. So eventually, you will have a successful business a few years later, and most of the books, at least the venture books, don't talk about it. So there are business books that talks about corporate in general, like how do you run a corporation, and logistics and finance and marketing and blah, 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 all the different disciplines.
Sure.
But there is no books that, as far as I know, that, or very few, that address all the execution items for a new venture or an entrepreneurship or a small business that just started.
Yeah. Well, that's an important point, because statistically, of course, we know that most startup businesses fail for whatever reason, somewhere along the lines, whether it's to do with money, finance, or regulations, or various other things that can come along and trip up the business, and then it goes under.
Exactly. So the structure of the book is almost like a checklist. By the way, the checklist itself is a free download on my website.
All right.
www.cxo360.net.
Okay.
You can download the checklist. What the book adds on top of the checklist, it gives you some analysis of each item in the checklist, and also gives you few examples for each item. So the structure of the book, each item you have to watch for, whether it's marketing, whether it's finance, whether it's logistics, intellectual property. There is like 20 something chapters. Each chapter talks about one discipline you have to pay attention to.
Yep.
And then it introduces the discipline, maybe 2 or 3 pages of introduction, and then 2 or 3 examples from different real life, not only technology, all kinds of industries. I try to be diverse in the industries I bring in the examples. I try to be diverse in the time, in history. I took some very old examples because only sometimes you have the right lesson learned only 20 years later or 50 years later. So I tried not to take examples from 2 years ago. I prefer to take examples from 50 or 100 years ago, even 500 years ago. One of my examples is the Gutenberg printing machine. So this is about the structure of the book.
Yeah.
So interestingly enough, I realized that I have a book I'm pregnant with a book only, 7 or 8 months into it. Even my family didn't know that I'm writing a book, because I didn't know that I'm writing a book. And
right.
So it was a long process of just coming to the realization that this is going to be a book.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting how it sort of eventually dawned on you. It was almost like a building up, putting all the pieces together, and then one day, of course, it just all came together, I suppose.
Yeah, right. So
yeah,
exactly as you said. So, I didn't write it in a sequential order. I wrote it as ideas came along. Jump from one discipline to another, and then I had to put together everything. And then my editor had to link all the different disciplines and different examples, because there was some connections. You talk about something in a finance chapter, but then you talk about kind of the same thing from a marketing angle. So my editor did a good job in linking between these different disciplines.
That's good. Well, I have a few questions for you here, Arie, and
Okay.
just leading on from that, actually, I have a question for you now. Is in the book you make it clear that even if someone has a good idea, there are many hurdles which must be overcome in order to bring that idea to the marketplace. So what would you say are the most important considerations for someone who has a great idea but really no clear strategy for marketing that, for implementing it? What would you say to them?
Okay, it's hard to give one answer, because the answer may be different for different industries. Whether my idea is a new restaurant or a new artificial intelligence gadget that's running on your smartphone.
Sure.
So, but speaking generically, the first thing you need to make sure is that people need, or customers need, your idea. That's obvious. The second one, are they willing to pay? Maybe you have a great idea, but in order to make it a profitable business, you have to sell it for 100 euros, but then you need to make sure people will pay 100 euros for this. Maybe they love the idea, but they will pay only 20 euros for this. So somehow you need to test the market and the price point that you think you're going to charge, and make sure people will buy that. So that's another thing.
Yep.
And the list goes on and on. Competition is something people, sometimes they come up with a great idea. Yes, there is no competition because nobody else is doing something similar, but there is competition because whatever you're trying to do to solve somebody's problem with your new idea, maybe there are other solutions. Maybe many technology people think, okay, I have this great invention that doesn't have any competition because nobody else is doing the same thing. But guess what? Competition can come from different things that solve the same problem. For example, you want to go from point A to point B. You can drive your own car, you can take the bus, you can fly, you can have a video call with the other person on point B. So even a video call, that's a good example. A video call is a competition to transportation.
Right.
Now I don't have to fly to see you. We can talk.
Exactly. Yeah.
Video. So a video is a competition to the airline industry, for example.
That's certainly
if I need to meet somebody here in town, we'll meet over coffee in town. But if I need to meet somebody 10,000 miles away, a video is pretty good replacement for flying over, paying 2,000 euros to fly over and meet you over there.
Yeah, and also there are extra benefits. Like, for example, it not only saves money, but it could save time.
Yeah, exactly.
So there could even be advantages. Yes, to doing it another way. Instead of doing it the conventional way, you might find another way which either saves money or saves time or saves some other resource. So there are, as you say, there are more kind of permutations than we sometimes realize.
Right, exactly.
And I suppose that's where your kind of thinking comes in, is that you try and think how, what all the solutions are, and what the best solution is, and whether someone's solution is viable. I suppose if they're just trying to market a new solution to a problem, whether that solution is viable and whether it can compete with what's already out there.
Yeah, you mentioned 5G, I think, before we started the recording. So here's an example. Let's say somebody design an app that can run only on 5G.
Yeah.
It could be a great app, a great idea, but then now I'm stuck because my success depends on 5G infrastructure implementation. And I've been through similar things. I was involved in the transition between 2G and 3G, and it never happened on time, and never happens at the cost you expect it to happen. I was involved in transition of local area networking between 1G and 2G. Here the G is gigabit per second, not generation like in the wireless. So the transition between 1 gigabit per second to 10 gigabit per second speed, once again, it always slower than you expect, and now your entire investment depends on somebody else's infrastructure progress or implementation. So the other, going back to your question, the other important thing is you have to look at the infrastructure or the ecosystem, map the ecosystem that is relevant and important for your business, and make sure that all the pieces in the ecosystem are ready for your new idea. Because otherwise, you slow down. In medical field, for example, is one good example. You can develop the best medical, pharmaceutical formula in the world, but now you have to wait for government approval, and that could take years.
It could take years. Yeah. So this is obviously important, that even having that essential idea and being very clear on what the benefits of that idea are, it can still be held up by external factors, which are beyond the control of the business itself, aren't they? Quite often. So, that kind of leads on to another question I had. I mean, you make it clear that you draw on case studies, as you've already mentioned. You draw on case studies quite often for solutions, as well as your own individual experience, which you've built up over your career. So could you provide a few examples of how these case studies, how they were instrumental in solving certain problems?
Okay, cool. Good question. So the sources of the case studies in the book were three groups of sources, so to speak. One source, obviously, is my personal experience being an executive and entrepreneur for so many years. I have tons of examples, good and bad, from my own career. That's one source of examples. The second source, I interviewed executives, different executives for the book, and picked their brain and took their stories as examples for the book. And the number three source, maybe the largest one, I did research on every topic. What other examples in the public domain are there? Because my personal experience is mostly in the industries I was involved, but the public domain information gives you examples from other industries, which I used a lot. I try to be very diverse as far as what industries I cover.
Yeah.
Anything from food to alcohol to airlines to high tech, of course.
Right.
So the examples are very diverse, and the reason for that, there are several reasons. One, I didn't want people or the readers to think that the only way to innovate is doing it by technology. That's definitely not the case. There are very good examples of great innovations that were not technology innovations. One example is comparison between Domino Pizza and Google.
Oh.
The reason I use that as an example because both went IPO about the same time, I think few weeks apart.
Right.
And people perception, if you stop people in the street, they'll tell you Google, that's the best stock ever. I wish I bought it 20 years ago, but if you look on Domino Pizza's performance in the stock market, they did 2 times better than Google.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah. So if you look on Domino Pizza today relative to their IPO price, and you compare it to Google price today relative to their IPO price, if you bought Domino Pizza shares at the IPO time, you do 2x better than if you bought the Google shares at the same time of the IPO.
Yeah, well, I never knew that. I mean, I knew that Domino's Pizza, obviously, they've expanded hugely over that time.
And Domino's innovation was on the customer service side. Yes, they are using technology, but they did not invent any new technology. They use internet, or they use the telephone to order the pizza, and later use the internet to order the pizza. They use technology, but their main innovation is the service.
Yeah.
Another example, another similar example is Uber. Uber.
Okay.
Again, they use technology, yes, but their main innovation is the service. You don't need to call for a taxi. You can call for a driver that use their own personal car, and they come faster, and the car is cleaner, and the driver is more polite than an average taxi driver. So that's another example of innovation that is not technology. A third example of innovation that is not technology is Southwest Airline. It's mainly in the U.S. area, so I don't know how much your European audience are familiar with them, but Southwest Airline is a low-cost airline here in the U.S. Over the years, they have done phenomenally better than most other airlines, and they did few logistical things that no other airlines are doing, but it turns out to be very important from a cost control. For example, they don't serve food. They serve you only peanuts.
Oh.
So it's kind of a joke that don't expect any, good food there, only peanuts, but see how much saving they get. They in airlines, a big part of the cost is the time the aircraft is spending on the ground. You want to minimize the time on the ground. So
right.
by not serving food, yes, they save money on the food, of course, but they save more money by minimizing the ground time of the airplanes, because you don't have to wait to load the food and then clean the airplane and unload the garbage and blah, blah, blah. So the biggest saving, their ground time between flights is as short as half an hour, sometimes less than that, where most full-service airlines, at least 1 hour at the gate, because they have to clean, they have to load the food.
Yeah.
So this is one example where the innovation is, something so trivial.
Yeah.
Another thing they did, they only fly Boeing 737. So they're a huge airline, but their entire fleet is only one type of airplane, which again saves a lot on the ground time, because the spare part is only for one airplane. You don't have to, sometimes if the spare part is something exotic that doesn't exist in this airport, you have to fly it from a bigger airport, the spare part, and the airplane is sitting there for several hours, maybe a couple of days, waiting for a spare part. And then the technicians, you don't have to train them on multiple aircrafts. They all trained on one aircraft, and they become very good at it. So if there is a problem, they're very efficient in fixing it.
Yeah. So it's sometimes the success of the business comes from doing things in a different way, or just doing a bit of original thinking.
Exactly, absolutely.
Because over in this country, in the UK, we have quite a few entrepreneurs, and one of them was Richard Branson, who I'm sure you've heard of.
Right.
And he did, he got into lots of different businesses, but it was the way that he marketed very cleverly. I think he was an original thinker. He did things differently.
Yes, absolutely.
And to achieve a better result than possibly some of the other businesses already in existence.
Yeah. And he became a celebrity by doing that, and now his celebrity status helps his business. So it's kind of building that, on top of each other.
That's very true, isn't it? It's true for a lot of successful when you have one person who's clearly, the one person like Steve Jobs,
right?
Or Jeff Bezos, of course, another very big one. We have to give these people credit to be able to mastermind such a venture, don't we?
Yes.
That's the thing. So let me just come on to another question for you here. Looking into the future, what do you see as the major hurdles for businesses generally, given that we're in a time of rapidly advancing technological change? It's happening all around us. As I say, you just mentioned 5G. What would your kind of suggestions be for businesses? How can they handle some of these changes which are coming down the line?
Yes. So once again, I'll try to be generic and not stick on one technology or another. The one generic issue that I think every innovator and entrepreneur will face or have to wrestle with is the rate of change. rate of change is becoming faster and faster and faster. So you need to be able to adjust your idea and adjust your plan and adjust your business if it's already running very rapidly and very frequently. If you had a automobile dealership, for example, the rate of changes in the first 100 years were pretty predictable, but now it's changing so quickly that if you blink too much, you may miss some of the new innovations in your industry. Same thing with restaurants or whatever your business is. The rate of change is one definitely something, and the young people are fine with that. You talk to millennials or Generation Z, they are fine with the rate of change. Actually, they will adopt a new paradigm immediately, very quickly, just because it's new. So that's another maybe positive thing for being an entrepreneur is if you come with some new idea, the young people will adopt it very quickly just because they like to play with new gadgets or new ideas, whether it's a new concept of a bar or it's a new concept of a hair salon or it's a new app on your telephone. They will adopt it immediately just because it's new.
Yeah.
So this is one thing that people need to pay attention. The other one is the increase in competition. There is in any industry, and there is a table in my book. I think I have it here in front of me. Let me try and open it compares, the amount of competition. Oh, here it is. Okay. It compares the amount of new product launches between 1980 and 1998. So it's not even today, it's 1998. And it talks about new type of cereals. In 1980, only 34 were introduced. In 1998, 192 were introduced.
Really?
They talk about dairy products. In 1980, only 26 different new dairy products were introduced. 1998, 255, almost 10 times more new products were introduced. And the list goes on and goes on and on with alcohol and coffee and, ice creams and everything you can think about. The amount of competition is increasing. So that's another thing you need to pay attention. And we talked about competition doesn't have to be exactly something that compete with you directly, but something that solve the same customer problem.
Right. Yeah.
So these are generically the two different things. You can talk about forever about what 5G will bring to the table and what artificial intelligence will bring to the table and what the Internet of Things will bring to the table. Those are new technologies, and if we have the same conversation 5 years from now, it will be different new technology and different buzzwords.
Yeah. Obviously, there's going to be some kind of technology coming which we can't yet imagine.
Correct.
Or it might relate to something that we see on science fiction.
Yeah.
For example, one example of that could be teleportation. Who knows? One day that could be possible to teleport like they do on Star Trek or something. These sorts of things could eventually become reality.
Absolutely. We talked before about the video call replacing the need to fly and visit you in the UK, and if you extrapolate from that, you can do a virtual reality call where we'll talk to each other and we will feel like we are in the same room and sitting across the same table.
That is virtually possible because they put these headsets on, and
exactly.
Your perception is that you're in that room with that person.
Yeah, exactly. So, and what will it do to society? I mean, as far as relationships in the family, as far as dating, as far as marriage, think about virtual marriage. You can be married with virtual reality to somebody on the other side of the world for 20 years.
Well, that makes you wonder, doesn't it?
Because today is Valentine's Day, so we have to,
yeah, that certainly makes you wonder. I mean, what's going to be possible in the future? It's kind of exciting, but it's also a bit scary, isn't it? Of what may be possible.
Yeah, people are scared from changes, especially as people get older. They're scared. I remember my mother had a hard time to use cell phones because there was no wire. She was scared from the fact that there was no wire. Mm-hmm. So she had a cell phone, but she never used it because there was no wire. It kind of freaked her out.
Yeah.
So, definitely. People, and younger people are doing very better in that respect because they love the new idea. If there is something with no wire, or whatever the change is, they will take it just to experience.
Yeah, it's a kind of that is an important factor. As we get older, we become kind of more set in our ways, don't we? Quite often, we don't want to change as much.
Right. So by the way, that brings another topic in the book. I think I have a whole chapter, but it's very important to mention.
Yeah.
Called emotional buying or emotional decision making in business. We talked about young people buying the first thing that comes out. They stand in line where there is a new smartphone. They'll stand in line, from the night before to be the first one to buy it, so they can come back to the office and show their friends that they have the latest and greatest. This is an emotional buying decision. They don't need it. They can use the same phone for another 3 years, but they will stand in line all night long to get themselves the latest phone.
Yeah. That's I suppose that happens quite a bit with technological things, because it's always the question of the latest. It's rather like having the latest computer, isn't it? You want the fastest one with the fastest processor in it or something like that. It's a similar idea. That's an important point, that people do buy on emotion, and they don't always buy just because of some kind of scientific reason or some kind of logical reason. It's a lot of it is based on emotion, as you say.
Right, the buying, or sometimes they're not buying. Sometimes they will refuse to buy because of an unrelated emotional thing. I'll give you an example. In one of my cases, I don't remember. I don't think I put it in the book. I did some business development for a client, and one of the customers that I spoke to said, bluntly, they love the idea, but he's now obligated to pick up his kid from school at 3 p.m. in the afternoon, so he doesn't have time to evaluate a new idea, because every time you integrate a new gadget into your office, it takes some extra time because of learning curve,
Sure, yeah.
Used to it and whatever. So he's not willing to give the extra time because he needs to pick up his kids from school. That's a emotional reason to not buy this new gadget that I offered to him. It had nothing to do with the new gadget. It had to do with the fact that he has some family obligation.
Yeah. Well, again, people react emotionally to things, and it may not even be that rational, the decision, but it's a decision that they've made, and that's fair enough. It's their decision at the end of the day. Their decision is their decision, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I'll just come on to this other question, which is kind of, it does follow on from what we've been talking about, actually. And that is, what would be your advice to any business which is just starting out right now in the present day?
Okay, so we talked about the challenges that a new business today has relative to a new business if you started 20 or 50 years ago. I'll give you an example. The short answer is pay attention to the execution. What do you need for this to be a successful venture? And once again, it doesn't have to be a technology. It could be any new service, hair salon, whatever it is. So go to my website, download the checklist, and go item by item and see what you need to do. Some items may be less relevant if you're a hair salon and more relevant if you are, a health service of some sort. But I'll give you an example from, again, I like very old examples. So who invented the light bulb? Many people relate to light bulb as the ultimate invention. If you ask around, people will tell you Thomas Edison did.
Right.
But that's not the right answer.
Really?
The person that really had the first light bulb working in the lab is your countryman, a guy by the name Sir Humphrey Davy.
Oh.
He had the first light bulb 70 years before Thomas Edison. The problem is, Mr. Davy was a scientist. All he cared about is prove that you can create light by running electricity through some kind of material, and then he stopped.
Okay.
And his light bulb lasted only for a few minutes, and then it burned out.
Yeah.
What Thomas Edison did, he did thousands of experiments to find the exact filament, the right material you need, so it doesn't burn too quickly. It will last for, few months. And he experimented in what type of gas you need to put in the bulb so it doesn't feed the filament, doesn't cause any filament burn off. So Thomas Edison is the one that is credited for inventing, but he's not the original inventor. He did all the details that you need to do to succeed, to make it a commercial success.
Right.
There is another thing that he did that is very important, and that's something everybody needs to pay attention when you start a new business. Okay, now we have this light bulb, but there is no electricity infrastructure because it never existed before. So he started a utility company that will bring electricity to homes and offices, because his light bulb invention is worthless if there is no electricity connected to the house. So he invested a lot in delivering the electricity to the different buildings. So pay attention to the infrastructure. If the infrastructure is not ready, maybe part of your new business needs to make sure that you make the infrastructure. Going back to our discussion about 5G,
yep.
You can have the best idea in the world, and it depends only on 5G. You either need to raise another gazillion dollars to accelerate 5G, or just take into account that you have to wait for 5G, and guess what? Based on history, it will be 2 or 3 years later than most people expect it to be.
Mm-hmm. Well, yes, again, these things, businesses sometimes have to do estimates, and I suppose they can sometimes get it wrong. Can't they?
Yeah.
So, again, that's something that you can't always foresee, no matter no matter how far you might go. There are, as you say, there's always going to be some unforeseen circumstances.
So that brings another thing, another chapter in the book, which is risk analysis and risk mitigation. Experience shows that things that can go wrong are likely to go wrong. So every time somebody comes with a new idea to investors do this exercise all the time, evaluating the risks. So you come with a business plan, and then they say, okay, let's see what happens if the R&D will be, over budget by 30%, or what if the market will not be ready at the time you plan to have it ready, but only 2 years later, or what if your cost will be twice as much as you think it is, and blah, blah, blah. So they do all these analyses, and they want to see that your business idea survive all these bad situations, because sure enough, at least one bad thing will happen along the way. Sometimes, often, 2 or 3 bad things will happen. So you need to be prepared. Your business plan needs to be able to sustain some of these bad things, because some of them will happen.
Yeah. That's it's you. Sometimes you could just roll a dice and say, what is going to happen in the future, because we genuinely, there's a limit to how far we can predict things, isn't there? Yeah.
So that's you need to analyze based on what type of problem you are trying to address. So that it's almost a timeless kind of thinking. For example, if I can extend people's life by 50 years, that will be, if you don't sacrifice the quality of life, that's something positive that will be true, was true 20 years ago and will be true 100 years from now. If people want to live longer so they can enjoy their grandkids and grandkids and what have you, as long as you don't sacrifice the quality of life.
Yeah, I mean, that's another thing. We're living longer, generally speaking, aren't we? And another important issue, just talking generally, is that the world population keeps on increasing, and there are implications to that, aren't there? Because the more the world population increases, the more demands will be placed on resources, on finding food, on building new houses and places to live. So it's all going to place a much greater demand on resources, raw materials of all kinds, as far as I can see.
Absolutely. That's a very good point. So you see in the past 10 years or so, 5 to 10 years, you see many startups have to do with food production, agricultural, resource use, so solar energy, wind energy, wave energy. So you see more and more of that, where 50 years ago, all the startups were just about faster computers. But now you see more and more, and if you look on venture capitalist portfolio, you see more and more, higher and higher percentage of startups in these industries that address exactly the problem you're talking about.
Right. Well, that's good, because they're obviously looking ahead and seeing that these things will need solutions. Because obviously one problem has been, as you know, is that the chopping down of the rainforests, the destruction of raw materials. How long can that go on for? And if the population keeps increasing, will it reach a critical rate where we're just using up too much of the Earth's resources?
Right, that's a very good point, because people tend to think that there is a magic solution, but the balance of the different solutions is important. You mentioned chopping down the rainforest. One reason in the past was additional vegetation for energy as a replacement for fossil fuel. So people were trying to solve the fossil fuel crisis 20 years ago, but then they caused another crisis, which is chopping down the rainforest.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And increasing food prices. If you remember, about 20 years ago, there was a crisis as far as food prices, because much of the agricultural output was taken away to create fuels that are non-fossil fuels.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about, that certain plants can produce, I'm not sure if it's ethanol. Is it ethanol you're talking about?
Yes. Right.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that they were using, they were just farming plants in order to create ethanol, which is fuel for, but this, I think it's just not a very environmentally friendly way of doing things, is it?
Right. So we started to get philosophical. The best, and none of the energy sources is 100% environmentally friendly. Even solar, even wind energy,
Right.
they all have some environmental side effects. So if you take an extreme example, the entire energy in the world will come from wind energy. It has environmental implications. You'll have the wind towers all over the place.
Yeah.
They interfere with, birds' migrations. They interfere with, bats.
Yeah.
Interfere with insects. There is all kinds of environmental implications. If you do a water dam to create electricity, you create environmental issues, negative environmental. So people think, okay, it's a hydroelectric is good because it doesn't use fossil fuel, but then you create some other environmental side effects by flooding areas that were not supposed to be lake before.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I can well understand that, because, of course, if you're creating a dam, you're concentrating all the water into one area, whereas before it might have been distributed and dispersed over a large area of land.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
You can certainly work out that there are lots of ramifications to when you undertake a project. Obviously, what you're saying is that you have to try and think laterally, isn't it? That and try and at least have a perception of what the consequences, what the ramifications are.
Exactly. It's almost every benefit has some side effects, negative side effects. It's like in medicine. You take one medicine, you have this or that side effects. You have another medicine. So it's all about judging the benefit versus the implications, the side effects implications. And it's never black and white. You have to make a decision based on each situation. And sometimes it's a personal decision. Some people will take the risk and take this latest drug, hoping that it will cure them faster or better than other drugs, but then the side effect, they're willing to take the risk of the side effects that this drug has, and instead of using an older drug with different side effects. So it's a personal decision.
Yeah. It's the type of thing that, only the individual being subjected to that can probably decide on, because you can't always quantify it, can you?
Correct. You can quantify. You say, okay, with this drug, you have 70% chance to survive the next 5 years, but you have X, Y, Z side effects.
Yeah. What I'm saying is that you can't quantify how bad something might be, or whether they're going to be able to tolerate it for a certain length of time, or
exactly.
These things are, it's not something you can just say is black and white. It's shades of grey. at the end of the day,
definitely.
Isn't it?
Shades of grey. Yes.
Yeah. So, Arie, is there anything else you'd like to add to what we've been talking about, what we've covered so far?
No, so I would like that to repeat what we talked. Go to my website to download the checklist, and the website is www.cxo360.net.
Okay.
And if you want to dig deeper into the checklist, get the book and see some examples. And by the way, the one of the reasons I made the examples diverse in industries is people can learn a lot from looking horizontally to other industries. Most people spend their career in one industry, so they are not open, or they haven't exposed themselves to ideas that exist in other industries.
Right.
And sometimes you have this, let's say you're running a hospital and you have some logistical issue that maybe an airline solved 15 years ago, a similar logistical issue in an airline. If you open your mind to talk to another airline or another hotel chain or whatever and look for similar problems, how they did solve it, and that will be a good lesson learned. So that's why I took the strategy in the book to have, I think, 30 different industries in the different case studies I have in the book.
Well, I suppose having that experience enables you to draw parallels between them, doesn't it? Because not many people, as you say, have sort of changed industries throughout the career that much. So, for someone like yourself, I suppose, does that give you an insight into certain parallels that you find within different industries?
Correct. I was blessed to expose myself to different industries, but there's so much you can do in a lifetime. So many of the examples are, things that I haven't done myself, but
right.
Definitely throughout my career, by changing different industries, I realized that similar problems exist in different places, and I just need to, look horizontally and see who had the similar problem before, and how did they solve it, and how can I adapt their approach to my specific situation.
Yeah. Very good. Okay, Arie. Well, I think we've just about covered it there, haven't we? So I'd like to say thank you very much to Arie Brish for being with us today. And thank you very much to everybody who has listened to this podcast. And we'll put a few links down below the video podcast, and you'll be able to access some of Arie's material there. So thank you very much to everybody, and we'll speak to you again. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks for having me. Bye-bye.